Welcome to the France 24 debate. The climate is never out of the headlines, rightly so. Whether it's another storm wreaking havoc, heavy rain, wind, flooding, or hot, dry conditions leading to wildfires that burn out of control, the climate is a many-layered debate, as I'm sure we're going to find over the next hour. Emmanuel Macron launched his climate cred, or relaunched it rather, with an announcement at Chamonix on the Sea of Ice, a glacier that is melting more and more with each winter that passes. And this was condemned by many as greenwashing, not limited to politicians. We can say Jeff Bezos, the head of Amazon, is giving $10 billion to save the environment, which to me sounds like a remarkable gesture. But some critics are saying that even if he does that, many things have to change beyond just giving money in order to make a difference. In fact, it was Bezos and his company that threatened to sack some employees who dared to speak out about the company's practices that allegedly harm the planet. So let's bring in our guests who are going to discuss this topic for us, the climate on a broader issue, but starting with the issue with Amazon. In the studio, we have Guillaume Villon de Benveniste, who's an investor and author. His book is called, and here's the cover of the book I'm going to show you, 1,200 billion on the table, how to get hold of them, create the jobs, and make France the Silicon Valley of 2030. Guillaume, thank you very much for being with us. We have three guests joining us from beyond our studios, and what that says about our carbon footprint, I don't know, but clearly it would have been nicer to have you all here, but sadly organising this is tricky. Joining us by satellite from Brussels, we have Marie Toussaint, who is a Green MEP. Marie, thank you very much for being with us. Pleasure to have you on our programme. Joining us by duplex, or rather satellite from Reading, is Dr. Elizabeth Robinson, Professor of Environmental Economics at the University of Reading. Thank you for being with us too.
Thank you.
And joining us by satellite from Newcastle under Lyme, I believe, because you're at Keele University, so I know it's the other Newcastle, not the famous one in the northeast. Sharon George, lecturer on environment and sustainability at the University of Keele. Sharon, thanks very much for being with us. Before we let our guests loose, let's take a look at this report by Yuka Roya.
It's the latest climate pledge to come from Amazon's boss, to the tune of $10 billion. Jeff Bezos says the new fund will start unlocking money in the summer to help scientists, activists and NGOs continue their efforts to protect our environment.
I want to work alongside others, both to amplify known ways and to explore new ways of fighting the devastating impact of climate change on this planet we all share.
Bezos is worth around $130 billion, and the new fund represents about 8% of his fortune. Amazon has been keen to show its commitment. Last year, the e-commerce giant co-founded the Climate Pledge with the goal of becoming carbon neutral by 2040. The project also called for investing $100 million in reforestation projects and ordering 100,000 fully electric delivery vehicles. Its latest battery-powered fleet, rickshaws, rolled out in India last month. Yet the online heavyweight has faced scrutiny over how much it is doing to reduce its carbon footprint, while shipping 10 billion items a year and operating massive cloud servers. It has faced walkouts and staff rebellion, with some defying corporate policy and openly criticising Amazon's slow progress in cutting emissions. Bezos is also the founder of rocket company Blue Origin, which aims to take tourists to the moon by mid-decade. That project also drew criticism over its carbon emissions.
Jeff Bezos pledging 8% of his fortune. If that were my fortune, you wouldn't be getting a lot of money to save the planet, but certainly this man has money to spare. And he's splashing it, so you've got to give him credit for that. But let's work out whether we feel that this is going to make any real difference. And I'll start with Sharon George from Keele University. Because Sharon, you and I have spoken before regarding the wildfires in Australia and the effect that that is having, a real pressing issue down under. In terms of what Jeff Bezos has said, do you feel impressed by what he's pledging to do?
Level, it seems like a very altruistic thing to do, but the real change that needs to happen is in how businesses operate. Businesses have such a massive contribution to making in combating climate change and cutting emissions. So, sort of this pledge is going to help. That's a really good thing to do. But businesses can't keep operating as if business as usual without making massive transformative changes. So I'd be more impressed if there were more changes within the organisation as well.
Would you automatically think of Amazon as one of the problem companies as regards the climate and climate change?
Well, I think most of us have used Amazon at some point. Amazon's such a huge company. Its carbon footprint is massive through its operations and transport. I think the way that business operates needs to vastly change if it's going to cut its carbon footprint. Electric vehicles is part of the solution, but where that energy comes from to power those vehicles is that needs addressing as well.
Sharon, for the moment, thank you very much indeed. Let's go to Reading. Dr. Elizabeth Robinson waiting for us there, Professor of Environmental Economics. Does it add up for you what Jeff Bezos is proposing, giving so much money to try to improve the issues regarding climate change?
Well, it's great when we see anyone, making a commitment towards doing something about climate change, and it'll certainly be interesting to see where he puts his money. I think what we know is that a lot of the problem of climate change, it's not about technological fixes, it's about government commitments. So, for example, we have governments that are sort of, being lobbied 200 million a year by fossil fuel companies. And what we really need to see is commitments from governments. And so I'm just wondering whether Mr. Bezos is going to support the sort of the movements that are trying to encourage what we need to see. And for example, one of those things might be pricing emissions properly. So at the moment, the cost that we impose on the planet when we fly is not reflected in the cost of that flight. The cost we impose on the planet when we drive, or indeed when Amazon is delivering packages, and all the sort of waste that goes with that is not reflected in the price that we pay. So what we need to see is government commitments, and I think already we can see that the pressure that people have been putting onto Amazon and on governments already through the youth strikes, through Extinction Rebellion, and through the employees of Amazon themselves. We see that is seeming to work.
Indeed, but one of those things is when you mess with the consumer, you're messing with a very powerful set of people, aren't you?
I wouldn't call it messing with the consumer. I think when you look at the statistics, well over 50% of the UK, for example, I'm sure it's true in other countries, want governments to deal with climate change. And so we want governments to be giving those signals. And to some extent, it's great when individuals make an effort to reduce their carbon footprints. But individual actions alone are not enough. We need to see governments act. And so, if Mr. Bezos is putting his money into technological fixes, there are some areas where we know it's going to be hard to decarbonize, such as, producing cement and steel. We need to figure out how we can rapidly decarbonize in the agriculture sector. But what we really require is commitments by governments and political will.
Commitments by governments, political will, consumers willing to change, according to Dr. Robinson. Thank you very much indeed. Back to you very shortly. Let's go next to Brussels to Marie Toussaint, the Green MEP. Marie, thank you very much for being with us. Calling for action from governments. Can I put it to you that perhaps the EU needs to act more? Perhaps you, in your position, need to lobby more for the kind of change that you want?
Yes, of course. No, of course, we need to act more. We need the EU to act more. We need the member states to act more. And we have this consciousness with the Green Deal, the EU Green Deal, that they're putting on the table, but we're still far from reaching our goals. But to go back to the Bezos issue, we have a man who had made more money in the 20 past years than any other man on the planet. And he earned this money by destroying the planet and by destroying our economies. So now he's putting this 10 billion dollars on the table saying, I will repair the planet. But what we need to do first, repairing is necessary, of course, but we also need to stop polluting. And this is where it hurts, because Amazon doesn't intend to stop polluting. They're responsible for as many CO2 emissions through their delivery operations than Portugal. And through their informatic activities, they're responsible to as many consumption of electricity as Poland. So we have one firm which is stronger and more polluting than different countries put together. And this is really where Jeff Bezos needs to react. I mean, repairing is really important, but stop polluting is even more important.
Indeed, it sounds from what you're saying that he could have more influence and more sway, more political power than many governments.
Yes, he could, definitely. He could, and we know that multinationals are currently writing the laws behind our backs with the contracts and all this stuff. And that's also what we saw in Seattle, because Jeff Bezos already created a fund for the homeless people. But we also know that he created this because he wanted to erase the fact that Seattle, since Amazon get there, is not livable from many families that don't have the money to live there. So, you know, you take on one hand and then you give a little bit on the other hand. And on what governments can do, governments can and should, they should ask for the companies who pollute to repair. And that's to be responsible, to be accountable, liable for the pollution they have. And I'm wondering, actually, are the $10 billion equivalent to the pollution from which Amazon is responsible? Or is it more, or is it less? Because maybe if you looked at the picture, if we had these laws that made the companies liable, then maybe the bill would be much higher. And that's a question that we also need to study.
I've been trying to work that one out today, and I haven't succeeded so far, but clearly that is an interesting point as to sort of what the proportionality of that would be and how that adds up to what Jeff Bezos is offering, the 10 billion, excuse me, and how much pollution's been caused by Amazon over the years. Marie-Toussaint in Brussels, thank you for the moment. Let's bring in our guest here in the studio, Guillaume Villon de Benveniste, who is an investor and author. And you're looking at the possibility of creating Silicon Valley in France. Your book deals with that issue. And you're not here as an apologist for Jeff Bezos, I know. But I'm suspecting that your line of thinking might be a little bit more in favour of Mr. Bezos and Amazon and what they do than what we've just heard from our other guests.
Yeah, I mean, I think that $10 billion is a lot of money, and at the same time is perhaps not that much. It's a lot of money relative to what France is investing in innovation. The country is investing 6 billion euros in innovation, so that $10 billion fund is actually more than what France as a country is investing in.
Let me pause you just to sort of get those figures, because it's important. France, as a country, investing 6 billion euros in innovation. Bezos, out of his back pocket, 10 billion, save the environment. That's what he's saying. So that's the kind of difference in spending power we're talking about.
Yeah, so we're seeing one individual investing more in the green transition than a country is investing in digital innovation, understood as venture capital innovation. So that's the first way of saying that it's a lot of money. It's also a lot of money, as you mentioned earlier, because that's 8% of his assets. And I don't know if everybody is investing 8% of their own assets into transitioning our economy to a greener one. But so in that respect, it's a lot of money. But in another respect, we talked about how much it costs to transition our economy from a gray one to a greener one. And the cumulative amount that's necessary is $32,000 billion on an annual basis. $32,000 billion. And our the global output is $80,000 billion. So that's basically 40% of our productivity should be going to transitioning our economy from a second industrial revolution one to a green and third industrial revolution.
These figures are astronomical.
Right, and $10 billion relative to $32,000 billion, that's actually a very small amount. So back to your question as to what this $10 billion means, it depends what perspective you're taking. If you're taking the perspective of an individual, it's a lot of money, but relative to what we would need to transition our economy to a greener one, it's unfortunately not enough.
Do you admire Mr. Bezos?
Personally, yes, I do. He in his first letter to shareholders, he said that shareholders should not be looking at renting Amazon stock, but buying Amazon stock and owning it, meaning that investors should take on a long-term view in their relationship to Amazon, and certainly Amazon hasn't been paying a lot of dividends since the company became public. So hopefully he'll be applying this long-term thinking to transitioning our economy into a greener one.
Guillaume, for the moment, thank you very much indeed. Let's bring in our guests from afar, Marie Toussaint in Brussels, Elizabeth Robinson at Reading, and Sharon George up there at Keele University. In central England, Sharon, I'll come back to you if you don't mind. In terms of sustainability, in terms of what Amazon does, do we have a problem here and now and in the future that we've set ourselves on a course that is incredibly difficult to change?
Well, yes. The short answer is yes. This is a problem now, and Amazon are not unique in having this conundrum. And right now, I'm being approached by companies who are all thinking about going carbon zero. But how on earth do you do that and maintain your business operation as business as usual? And to go from operating profitably to a brand new infrastructure, if you're going to electrify the whole of your business operation, especially if you are manufacturing, is very, very difficult. But the fact is, climate change is happening right now, and we're seeing the impacts of this around the world. And if we don't see this change now, this is going to impact productivity anyway. People are going to start seeing the impact of climate change and seeing losses to the businesses, because there is no business as usual, whichever way they do. So we need this investment, but we need it in company structures. We need transformation in the way that operations happen fundamentally in so many areas, and that can't happen overnight. And but once this starts happening, once you start getting that investment, then those costs start to come down as these things become more mainstream. So I think maybe what we're seeing is the start of real action, rather than what we've seen up until now, which is just lip service and greenwash.
Sharon, thank you. I need to pause it here. It's the end of part one, but stay with us. More to come. More issues to be discussed here at the France 24 debate. Part two of the France 24 debate. Welcome back. We're discussing the climate, the environment, and Amazon. The other Amazon, not the rainforest, but the fast delivery service that sells you cheap goods and brings them to your door. It pollutes the planet. That's what some workers have said inside. They've been prevented from speaking out by Jeff Bezos, who slapped a ban on them. And since then, Bezos has now decided to contribute some $10 billion of his own cash, 8% of his own personal fortune, in order to help save the planet. So that's to be lauded, but is it going to be enough? Let's bring in our guests who can give us opinions galore on this issue, because the climate is very much a multi-layered debate. In the studio, Guillaume Villon de Benveniste, investor and author of 1,200 billion on the table, how to get a hold of them, create jobs, and make France into a Silicon Valley for 2030. Great to see you, sir. Joining us from afar. Welcome, but afar. And I don't know what this says about our carbon footprint. I hope it's not bad news. By satellite from Brussels, Marie Toussaint, who is a Green MEP. Marie, thank you very much for staying with us. Joining us from Reading in England, just west of London there, Dr. Elizabeth Robinson, Professor of Environmental Economics at the University of Reading. Thank you for being with us and staying with us. And joining us again from satellite from Newcastle-under-Lyme, up there in central England, near to Stoke-on-Trent, at Keele University. That's what I should get to, the relevant point. Sharon George, who is a lecturer on environment and sustainability at that university there in Keele. We heard from you, Sharon, at the end of part one, talking about the beginning of a change. Let's now bring in Elizabeth Robinson from Reading to get more comments on that, perhaps. In terms of the change, Elizabeth, and there are two issues you deal with, I think, in what you do, the environment and economics. Which will be the leader? Will it be the money side of it or the green side of it?
I think it's the policy side of it, right? That's what we really need to look at. To some extent, I think as Guillaume said, in one respect we can say it's a lot of money, in another respect we can say it's a drop in the ocean. What we really need to see is the commitment of governments to implement the right policies. So we need to align policies with what makes sense. At the moment, it really doesn't make sense that we find governments across the world subsidizing fossil fuels. That's just a no-brainer that we need to remove those subsidies. We need to be subsidizing the good things like clean energy. So of course, the money can be spent in certain ways. There are certain technologies that can help, but we've really got to look for political will in terms of commitment. We know what we need to do to reach net zero by 2050, and certainly, companies like Amazon saying they're going to reach net zero by 2040. Well, that's great, but really they could probably be a little more ambitious than that. So companies need to start at home by making their own commitments, just as individual countries are making their commitments. But we really need a global commitment as well. And so it's at all levels we need to be doing stuff, and we're running out of time to make incremental change. So really, it's not what's the priority or what should we do. We need to do a lot of everything right now. And so we need to look at technological fixes. We need to look at policies. We need to look at implementing taxes. And certainly we need to look at the climate justice side of things. So we need to ask how low and middle income countries can also transition to a sort of, a net zero without, losing the ability to reduce poverty. And that's a really important part of the discussion too.
It's been a massive issue, for instance, in India, hasn't it, over recent years, with India's economy exploding in many ways, and India pointing out that, when Britain was going booming during the Industrial Revolution, it polluted ad nauseum in many ways, and obviously sort of bore the riches of that, and now creates a society where they can cut back on pollution, those kind of things. Mm-hmm. India's saying it needs the right to pollute. We haven't seen poverty be really eradicated there in any way yet, have we? But that right to pollute, is that something that needs to happen, do you think? They have to have the right to do these things on the cheap and create the mess that is being created?
Well, I must say, look, first of all, high-income countries have a moral obligation to act, we know that. But if we look at somewhere like India, we've all seen, I think, on the news, the pictures of the air pollution in the cities. And so when we talk about the right to pollute, we could rephrase that and say the right to destroy the health of the next generation of Indians. So I think from a high-income country perspective, we need to help India and other countries like India to grow in a way that is not polluting. Because when we talk about the right to pollute, really when we're looking about burning fossil fuels, when we're looking about the kind of air pollution we're seeing in Delhi, when we look at the impact of burning rubble in the states around Delhi, what we're seeing really is, one, when farmers are burning stubble, we're looking at poverty. Farmers don't have any other opportunities. In the cities, we're really looking at a need for strong regulation. So it's not about the right to pollute. I would talk about the right of India to have a higher standard of living, to have clean energy, to have clean technologies, to have good food security. And if we rephrase it that way, it's not the idea that India needs to follow a development path like we have. There are opportunities to work with India to have a clean economy where we can reduce poverty more rapidly without harming the population of many through things like air pollution.
Indeed. Hearing that loudly and clearly, Dr. Elizabeth Robinson there in Reading. Let's go to Brussels, to Marie Toussaint, because picking up on what Dr. Robinson was saying there in Reading, Marie, I'll add that here in Paris, I think it's something like 40,000 people a year lose their lives, die, related to breathing problems. And that's due to the poor air quality within Paris. One of the world cities in one of the biggest economies on the planet. And still the problems aren't eradicated. At your end of this argument, do you feel in many ways you're banging your head against a brick wall, that you can't make the progress you want to make?
Well, first of all, it's not 40,000 people in Paris, right? It's broader,
sorry,
and then we have pollution. Yeah, tell me.
No, go ahead, please. Your view is far more important than mine. Go ahead.
Okay. No, we have big air pollution in Paris, but what's more is that indeed the countries don't respect their climate goals, and this is one really important issue. But again, I want to get back to the Bezos story because it tells a lot about our societies. We have a man who is doing an advertisement campaign picturing himself as a climate activist. But when we look at what it is really, we have a guy who made a lot of money, and sometimes even 12 billion. In the end of January, he made $12 billion money in 15 minutes. Because of the cost of the actions of his company. So we're talking about something that is really different from society as everyone knows it, right? And we're talking about this man who makes money because he decides of the way he wants to rule the companies in the countries where Amazon is operating. He's designing the working conditions of the people who work for him. And he's also doing fiscal evasion. He's earning that much money by taking the money out of the hand and the pockets of the people to put it in fiscal paradise, in fiscal heavens. So that's what we are talking about right now. And yes, the country need to act, but if they want to act, they need to take the money where it is. They need to take the money in the fiscal heavens. They need to take the money out of the companies that are earning so much and making so much money, and out of the people behind the companies who earn so much money. And this is not acceptable that in our society we have so many people dying of poverty that is directly linked to climate change, and then have some people spending a few dollars to fight against climate change in what way we don't know yet how we will do it. If we want the countries to act, then we also need the companies to give the money to the countries and be fair in that direction. And that's also what we are looking for in France and in the EU, is to find this money to be able to invest in a clean transition, in a green society. And this money, we need it, and it's here, there, and it's in Amazon, and also in all the fossil fuel companies that Amazon is working with, offering them with cloud services or with AI services, and also financing political organizations denying the very fact of climate change. So the money is there, we need to take it, to give it back to the public so that we can ensure this transition is done.
Indeed, climate change deniers, I'm thinking immediately of Donald Trump, but we're not going to go there. Let me just ask you, Marie, because what you're saying makes a lot of sense to me, and I'm sure it does to many of the people watching this program. But is the problem that many people who vote don't vote for your kind of policies, for the things that you're talking about? They don't see that what you're suggesting would help them and help their health and help their children's health and create a better society. This is, again, one of the problems you've got to try to get across, to actually get people to change their mindset, change their way of thinking.
I do believe that people are voting for a greener policy and for a fairer policy. I do believe that when politicians campaign, they exactly say that we need to decide, and not the companies, that we need to protect our planet and not destroy it, and that we need to work towards equality when inequalities are growing and growing. And the problem is when we go to action, then we have this weight of the lobbies being everywhere around, and I'm in the European Parliament, and I know that the lobbies are going to see the member of parliaments all the time, but also the Commission and also the member states. And they try to push for their policies. And when the citizens want the change, the lobbies are there with huge amounts of money to bribe and to push for their solutions. And it can be bribe or legal lobbying, but still we are living in a society where the lobbies still have a lot of power. And the citizens, they really want us to act, and to act in a just and fair way. That's what they're requesting, and that's also why I'm saying that it's crazy that this Jeff Bezos man is earning so much money on our backs. And then he says, I will spend a lot of money to protect you, when we would like to have this money ourselves, to be able to protect ourselves.
Marie Toussaint, it sounds like you're saying this is a complete greenwash, to use the word that is in the title of our debate. Climate greenwash is what we're talking about. Marie Toussaint in Brussels, a Green MEP. Thank you very much. We'll get back to you very, very shortly. We've got guests in Reading, guests in Central England, Newcastle on the line. And here in the studio, Guillaume Villon de Benveniste, author of 1,200 billion on the table, how to get hold of them, create jobs and make France a Silicon Valley of 2030. Could you do that with all that money that you're talking about in your book and still not pollute the planet more? Or are you talking about creating an even worse situation?
That's a tough question.
I'm sorry, that's what I get paid for, you know.
Yeah, okay. But there is a tension between prosperity and in the environment.
We're hearing that, aren't we?
Yeah, Sharon talked about it, so did Marie. And I guess that the solution is in solving this tension. And to this effect, Emmanuel Macron created the One Planet Summit, where he brought together asset managers, 8 different asset management funds, as well as 6 sovereign funds that all are managing about $18,000 billion in assets. Those are companies that they have shares in. And so hopefully with this kind of financial incentive, CEOs, executive committees could hopefully choose green-friendly projects over gray-friendly projects and sort of help us transition from a gray and polluting economy to a greener economy. And so that's an interesting example of how a government can encourage businesses to operate in a environmentally friendly fashion and revamp their operations, as was mentioned earlier, in a way to be more respectful of the environment.
Is this like the gaffer tax he's talking about, sort of creating those kind of situations?
No, it's something else. It's he got together asset managers, the world's largest asset managers that own shares in leading companies, and suggested that they encourage their CEOs to go for green projects over less green projects. And so having financial backing to support the green transition is really critical. And hopefully this is a kind of government-led initiative that will bring about the change that we're all looking for.
Government-led initiatives, we're coming back to that one, in a debate where we've learned that Jeff Bezos earns more or spends more on, I'll say, his tonic bill than Poland has to spend on, making itself more green. I'm sorry, I've misquoted Marie Toussaint appallingly there, and I apologise to Marie for that. Let's bring in Sharon George again from Keele University, a lecturer on environment and sustainability. This situation, Sharon, I sense this is meat and drink to you, the idea of the environment, sustainability, and how we get along those lines. We have an internet which is polluting. We have services created by the internet which are polluting. And people like to get their products PDQ, don't they? This is all part and parcel. People don't want to wait. They want it tomorrow or even the same day.
Yeah, and that this expectation, this kind of way that we've become accustomed to having it good and we want it now, and so this whole consumerism, this trap that we're in now, that it's going to take more than just a change in businesses being efficient. There's going to have to be a complete change in the way that we consume if we're going to tackle climate change and go down to the levels of CO2 production that we need to. And some companies are embracing this, and some we are seeing some really good practice going on. But the challenges that we have are just vast, and we can't just offset carbon anymore. And we do absolutely need to change and work with companies, because it's a really difficult transition, and we need to meet companies halfway in what we expect.
In terms of what is expected, obviously we want to have a cleaner planet. Is one of the problems that the idea of a cleaner planet is something that business doesn't buy into, because, again, it's all about the bottom line, Sharon. It's all about trying to make that profit, and, maybe the green issue is something they can't afford. Yes, the government can push them to make them afford it or make them consider that as part of the equation. But fundamentally, business and green policies don't get on.
Well, I think, though, a lot of the problems we've created because that's the way we've always done it. Like we've had this whole issue about plastics. Plastics are awesome, and we've produced them. But now we know the impact that they have. We're still carrying on doing the same thing. And it's exactly the same with fossil fuels. While using fossil fuels to underpin your business, while business as usual is still cheaper, then we're going to keep doing it. And we're never going to willingly let go of that safety net without, a nudge in the right direction. And I think pricing has a big part to play in that. The carbon needs to be reflected in the price.
The carbon needs to be reflected in the price. That issue of plastics is very interesting. I mean, I'll just tell a little domestic story here. We recycle because we have to, and that's the way it is, and that's a good thing. The waste bin for landfill never, ever gets filled. They could take that once a month, but they take it once a week. At our house, it's the the one of the plastics that actually gets full to bursting. I've got to take the residue to the tip and recycle it there. And, we need to sort of like do more recycling on that line, I suppose. And just bring in Elizabeth Robinson from Reading, Professor of Environmental Economics there. That issue of plastics, that issue of that whole industry, and it is a massive, massive industry. How does change start there? Because clearly, Turkey's voting for Christmas is a phrase I'm thinking of. It's kind of, isn't it kind of looking at sort of like sounding its own death knell in some ways?
Yeah, I think you made a good point there, that when we look at our recycling, we just have this huge abundance of plastic. So just do a thought experiment, okay? Let's suppose that, let's look at the new normal, okay? It seems normal now that we go into a coffee shop and we get a disposable cup and we drink our coffee in about 5 minutes and then we just throw the cup away, okay? This is a new normal, it's a crazy new normal. So do a thought experiment. What if we just slapped on a huge tax? So disposable cups, you put a tax of £2 on a disposable cup of coffee, okay? Very soon people would start bringing their cups into the shops. They'd soon remember. And I think that really reflects what Sharon is saying, that we need to price in to goods the true cost of those goods. So at the moment, we give business a free ride, okay? We say you can use any old package you want, and then, it's consumers, the taxpayers, our local governments that we know, certainly in the UK, are really short of money. And they take on that responsibility of recycling. So if we priced in to businesses, and I think they've got this in some European countries, you have to take back your waste, you have to take back your packaging, you have to deal with it, you have to deal with those costs. We'd soon see a change. So, it's all very well to say businesses should just, do the right thing. But to do the right thing, it's sort of easier if you've got a level playing field, and what governments can do is create a more sensible level playing field. So, I see our recycling, we have this huge pile of recycling, but it's not about recycling better, it's about just reducing the need for plastics. So we already see that there are supermarkets, for example, responding to the pressure to offer fruits and vegetables with less packaging, with paper packaging. And of course, we know that plastic is a great thing in terms of, being able to reduce waste and stuff, but at the same time, it is crazy when we'll buy a bottle of water and throw the bottle away. Now, if companies had to bear the cost that at the moment is imposed on society, imposed on the planet, there would be a change. So governments just have to make those difficult choices, and they shouldn't be so difficult, but it seems they are very difficult for governments to make. But if companies had to internalise the cost, then things would change.
Hear what you're saying. Is it as simple, Elizabeth, as going back to a time when I briefly, as a young child, had a job helping the milkman deliver milk, and back in those days, because I'm that old, it was in a bottle, a glass bottle, and those bottles were recollected and reused. That's an example of what we're talking about, isn't it?
It is an example, and I've switched to having my milk delivered in bottles, and I too remember as a child that our milk would be delivered in bottles by a milk float that was powered by electricity, the little electric milk float.
That's exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I remember it too. We're the same age groups, clearly. But, and that's a small part of it, but already, people are starting to offer, and some of the big supermarkets are starting to embrace the idea that we can refill our detergents. So, I don't want to pretend that we all have time to go to the shops every single day after work, to buy a day's worth of fruit and vegetable in paper bags. I'm being realistic about the pressures we're working mothers and working fathers, and there's a lot of time pressures today. But there are obvious things we could do. And if the economics make sense, then people will respond, and companies will respond too. It's not rocket science. Solving 80% of climate change is not rocket science. It's about sensible policies.
Fantastic. Dr. Robinson, thank you as ever. Please stay with us. I'll try and get back to you again for another turn. Marie Toussaint in Brussels, still with us, I hope. She's there. Fantastic. Marie, great to have you with us still. Green MEP, lots of things to say. Fantastic. Can I let you loose on Jeff Bezos again? If you could speak to him and have a long conversation with him, what would you say? What would you advise him to do? What would you ask him to do?
Well, the first thing I would ask is to stop financing the fossil fuel companies. That's an absolute emergency, and that's what we need to do with the public funds, the public subsidies, of course. We need to do it also in the EU, where we give more than 100 billion euros per year as direct and indirect subsidies to fossil fuels companies and fossil fuel infrastructures and all these things that make our economy work on fossil fuels still, where we just need to stop them and leave the fossil fuels under the ground. So that's the first thing I would tell him, like just quit it. And the second thing, I guess, would be to be fair. And to be fair to his employees, to be fair to the communities where Amazon is settled. And we know that he's destroying twice more jobs than he's creating. We also know that the employees, the lowest employees of his company, don't even have the right to protest. And that might be one of the reasons why we have this fund, her fund, being created today, is because the engineer of his companies finally struck, following the call from Greta Thunberg and all the climate activists in the world. They struck and they said, we are not afraid of losing our jobs, like the companies from the delivery machine might be afraid. So they stood up, and that might be one of the reasons that Jeff Bezos got afraid and created this fund. So I will tell him that, like, stop helping fossil fuel, stop selling your own oil, by the way, because Amazon also created its own oil brand product, Amazon oil brand, you know, and also be fair to the community you live in. That would be the two things I would say.
Marie, what would you say to all the customers who use Amazon?
That's another question. We have to understand that all our economy, for years, for decades, and maybe for centuries, but let's stick to the decades, at least since the 60s, we have built an entire society and economy on the consumption of fossil fuels, on pollution, on the fact that pollutions were free and were even being subsidized. So we have the subsidies for the fossil fuels, we have the subsidies for the plastic products, we have the subsidies for the pesticides and for bad agro habits and bad ways of doing agriculture. So we have all this promotion of bad consumer habits. So now we have to change that. And we have to set up policies that help the people who want to consume well, which is possible, and also consume less. And there we can have the public policies that accompany them to do so. But if we want to have the margins of power to do this, then we also need to say stop, and to stop all those who push us to consume badly by destroying our planet and exploiting the people. And that's the shift that we have to make. It's a big, big shift, actually, because we're all organized in that direction, looking for continuous growth, rather than listening to the rights of nature and punishing the people who steal something to eat while not punishing ecocides, the crimes against the planet. So we need to shift, and this is a big step, but it can also make people really happy, create a lot of jobs, and give us a better health for everyone.
I can only imagine that everybody listening, regardless of how they vote, would agree with everything you were saying, because it made so much sense. Marie Toussaint from Brussels, from the Euro Greens, thank you very much for sharing your time with us here on the France 24 debate. Thank you. Thank you to Dr. Elizabeth Robinson in Reading, Professor of Environmental Economics, making so much sense. Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. Thanks again to Sharon George, lecturer in environment and sustainability at Keele University. I'm sure we'll speak again. Thank you very much indeed. We've spoken before about wildfires, I know, and that was really informative. And thanks to our guest in the studio, Guillaume Villon de Benveniste, author of 1,200 billion on the table, how to get them, create jobs and make Silicon Valley in France for 2030. I hope it's going to be a green one. Guillaume, thank you for joining us. Thanks to you for joining us too, and stay with us. More to come here on France 24.